let's assume that everybody runs on 5 issues, but 3 issues that are universal. And when I say five, 3 national issues and 2 that are more unique to their district, to their state, whatever. What would be for the Democrats? What would be the 3 issues that you feel can work in almost every Democratic district or every race in which the Democrats hope to play in, whether it's their own, whether it's deep blue districts or swing districts. What do you think are the 3 universal issues that all Democrats can rally behind going into 22?
The first one I think is always obvious. It's healthcare. Just pointing out the fact that Republicans will continue to try to steal your healthcare every time they're in power, and especially tying in it with the pandemic. And we've seen that the systematic issues that we've known have existed for this entire time have just been exaggerated and put on steroids during the pandemic, right? Whether it's the equity, whether it's the access, whether it's the affordability, healthcare is always going to be, I think, number one on people's minds. Second is, I think, stability with the economy. That means jobs. That means living wage. That means you being able to afford your mortgage or have mortgage relief if there's a pandemic. And I think that's always on people's minds. The third one is always iffy, and I think that's what you were talking about, where it's local. I know here in Chicago, where I live, there's a big push on for crime. I think crime in general is always kind of on people's minds, depending on where you live. But the problem with that is like that's vastly different on how people want to approach it. There's like the defund the police. There's community outreach. There's a lot of different solutions, right? There's the right loves the law and order kind of verbiage, but we've seen that crime can boost the candidate, right? And so I think those are probably the three things that I think people can universally across 50 states kind of agree on.
Where would climate fall in your
The
in your
problem with climate is it should be number one, right? But the problem is it's very hard to market, right? Because the I told you this before when early on and almost in our test episodes that never got released, but Biden addressing climate change as a jobs thing was the smartest thing I think he could have did because to fix climate change, you need a bunch of jobs to do all these things that he wants to do, right? Retrofit all these buildings, the windmills, all this stuff is just all high paying quality jobs that are going to be sustainable for decades to come, right? So I think if you market it like that to say, hey, we could save this planet and put people to work, but part of the problem is when you start talking about ice caps melting and the floods across New York and a tornado hitting Chicago for the first time in 50 years. Like, I think people generally care, but I just don't think it's more important than healthcare. And then, but at the same time, it's all kind of combined, right? When there's flooding, we saw housing disparities and we saw all that stuff that goes into the infrastructure stuff. We saw access to healthcare get affected. So it's all kind of connected. I believe climate change should be number one on everybody's list. It's just hard to market depending on where you are.
And you know what's interesting? I agree to a certain extent. And what's funny is we use climate, you and I were working on a project earlier, even on the script, should we say climate, clean energy? And I think I will tell you, and I'm not sure if I've said this on the pod. I've said this to you, definitely offline. Is I think to your point about Biden and focusing on jobs, the other thing that blows me away about clean energy, and full disclosure, I've been working on a project that involves the repowering of buses, basically making current school buses electric. Um, the thing about, and then I'm also, I think I've said before, looking to put solar in the house. Um, the thing about clean energy that has made it less boring and it's brought me to climate is literally been the innovation. It goes from that boring, the ice caps are melting and there's X amount of CO2 in the air. When you realize the challenge, and it's almost like a space race, the excitement of of turning our entire uh all the cars on the roads to electric, the fact that you could actually that there's someday expect to actually have electric planes and learning about how that works, the fact that with solar not only can you save money, you can make some money, and being on grid or off grid, Now, granted, this might be the fact that I'm now 53 years old and different things interest me, but I think my I've always been concerned about the climate, but talking about climate in some of those scientific, almost environmental areas, they just didn't. I don't want to say excite or interest me. I took them seriously, but they weren't fascinating, right? The innovation on how we deal with climate change to me is just outrageously fascinating. And I think that's how I think a lot of folks should be approaching it.